What I remember most about that winter wasn't the cold. It was how silent the city became. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that presses against your ears because nothing can move the way it's supposed to. You couldn't see the end of your own street, and breathing felt like pulling damp cloth into your lungs. That was the winter of 1952. I was young then, still convinced that disasters were things that happened to other people, in other places. I learned quickly how wrong I was. The air turned thick overnight. It crept into homes, into coats, into your chest. The streets disappeared behind a curtain of dirty gray, and the city seemed to shrink inward. Buses stopped running, shops closed early. People stayed indoors, coughing behind closed windows. But not everyone. At the center of our neighborhood was a man named Harold Bennett. He was well into his 70s, walked with a cane and spoke slowly, but when things went wrong, people listened. He'd spent his life as a civil servant, and that calm authority never left him. "This fog won't beat us," he said one morning, standing outside the community hall with his collar pulled up, "but we'll have to look after one another." That was all it took. We organized ourselves without much planning. Small groups, short routes, knock, check, help, move on. The worst part wasn't the walking, it was the uncertainty. Every door felt like a question mark. Our first stop was an older couple who lived above the bakery. They hadn't gone out in days. Mr. Bennett showed them how to seal their windows with damp cloths and reminded them to drink water even if they didn't feel thirsty. His voice stayed steady, even when theirs shook. A few streets later, we found a woman living alone who hadn't answered her door. The fog was so dense I could barely see Mr. Bennett kneeling beside her once we got inside. I froze for a moment, unsure what to do. "Stay focused," he said quietly. "Fear doesn't help anyone." He guided me through it, water, warmth, steady breathing, until help arrived. I don't remember feeling brave. I remember feeling useful. Word spread. More neighbors joined. Some brought scarves, others brought food. A local chemist donated protective masks, and handing them out felt like delivering hope in small paper envelopes. People thanked us with tired smiles, with nods, with eyes that said more than words could. Days passed like that, slow, heavy, exhausting. But something else filled the streets alongside the fog: trust. When the air finally cleared, it felt unreal. Sunlight returned, sharp and bright. People stepped outside cautiously, as if the world might disappear again if they moved too fast. A week later, we gathered outside the hall. Someone brought tea, someone else brought bread. No speeches, no applause. An elderly woman pressed a folded scarf into Mr. Bennett's hands. "For keeping us steady," she said. He smiled and shook his head. "We did that together." I still think about that winter sometimes, not because of the fear, but because when the air turned against us, the people didn't. The day love chose service. The church bells had already rung once when she realized how quiet the room felt. Not nervous quiet, something heavier, the kind that makes you pause even when everything is supposed to be perfect. She stood near the front, hands folded, breathing slowly. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass, casting soft colors across the wooden floor. Faces smiled back at her. Family, friends, neighbors, people who had driven miles just to witness this moment. Then the doors opened. Not gently. The man who stepped inside didn't belong in polished shoes or pressed jackets. His coat was damp, his boots muddy, his voice urgent. "I'm sorry," he said, not slowing down. "We've got trouble downriver. The banks gave way. Homes are underwater. We need help. Anyone who can lend a hand, now." The room didn't move at first. She turned her head and met her partner's eyes. No panic, no confusion, just understanding. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. She stepped forward. "Then this can wait," she said calmly. People can't. What happened next felt less like a decision and more like a wave. Jackets were grabbed, ties loosened, dresses lifted out of the way. Someone shouted about first aid kits. Someone else ran for their truck keys. Within minutes, the celebration became a mobilization. They drove together, windows down, sirens in the distance. The closer they got, the worse it looked. Water where streets should be. Furniture piled on porches, people standing in shock, holding what little they'd managed to save. They split up without discussion. She stayed with families, wrapping blankets around shaking shoulders, kneeling to talk to children, offering steady words she hoped were true. He worked with others, hauling supplies, guiding people to higher ground, helping carry what couldn't be replaced. There was exhaustion, there was fear, but there was also purpose. Hours passed. By nightfall, a nearby school had been turned into a shelter. Rows of cots, folding tables stacked with food, volunteers moving quietly, efficiently, people helping strangers without being asked. She finally found him near the entrance, leaning against the wall, dirt streaked across his hands. "This wasn't the plan," he said softly. She smiled, tired but certain. "No, but it feels right." They stood there for a moment, watching the room, neighbors comforting neighbors, kids laughing despite everything. Then she spoke again. "Why wait?" He blinked. "For what?" "For the rest of it," she said. "We're here. Everyone we love is here. This is who we are." It didn't take long. A small space was cleared. Someone found music. Someone else stood in to speak the words. No decorations, no formal clothes, just hands held tightly and promises spoken clearly. Not about perfection, about showing up, about choosing others, about building a life that would always make room for service. The applause wasn't loud, but it was real. And long after the water receded, people remembered that day not as a disaster, but as the moment love proved what it was made of. The contest nobody forgot. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's this. Family competitions are never just games. They're quiet wars disguised as fun. And they have a way of revealing exactly who people are when pride is on the line. It was an autumn afternoon, the kind where the air feels sharp but friendly, and the park was filled with long shadows and laughter. Our family had gathered to celebrate a birthday, but tradition had taken over, as it always did. Out came the hoops. Every year someone suggested a contest, and every year we pretended it was harmless. This time, though, there was a reward waiting at the end. A brand new bicycle stood nearby, gleaming in the sunlight like a challenge. My sister noticed it first. She didn't say much, but I knew that look, focused, determined, the kind of look that meant she had already claimed victory in her mind. That alone was enough to make me step forward. "Guess we're doing this," I said, trying to sound casual. She raised an eyebrow. "Hope you stretched." The contest began with laughter and cheers. Hoops spun. People clapped. Someone played music from a radio balanced on a picnic table. It was lighthearted, at least on the surface. As the minutes passed, competitors dropped out one by one. The crowd thinned until it was just the two of us. The jokes faded. The smiles tightened. We weren't kids anymore, but in that moment, we absolutely were. She shifted closer, testing my balance. I adjusted without looking. She laughed, pretending it was nothing, but I could see the strain in her shoulders. Mine weren't feeling great either. Time stretched. Every cheer from the sidelines felt louder. Every wobble felt final. And then it happened. Her hoop lost rhythm, just for a second. Enough. It hit the ground with a hollow sound. The earth erupted, but I barely heard it. I was too busy watching her reaction. I expected frustration, maybe even anger. Instead, she exhaled and smiled. "Well," she said, brushing her hands on her jeans, "guess today's yours." She hugged me before I could say anything else. The prize was handed over, photos were taken, the moment passed, like moments always do. But something about it stuck with me. Weeks later, another birthday came around. A box sat on the table, wrapped carefully. She opened it slowly. The bike. She looked up at me, confused. "You won it," she said. "And you wanted it," I replied. That seemed more important. She laughed, shook her head, and pulled me into a hug so tight it knocked the breath out of me. We never talked about it again. We didn't need to. Because some victories aren't about winning at all. They're about knowing when to let go, and who matters more than the prize.